Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your day here at the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. I'm Stephen Fagin, the curator. And for this week's gallery talk, we are commemorating the 55th anniversary of the dedication of the John F. Kennedy Memorial, which is located about a block away from Dealey Plaza behind the Old Red Courthouse. And I will share with you an image of it here. There is the John F. Kennedy Memorial, dedicated in June of 1970. And what I wanted to do today is not just talk about how this memorial came to be, but talk about that broader journey of memorialization that Dallas experienced from the time of the assassination to the time this official city monument to President Kennedy was dedicated in 1970. On the first anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, November 22nd, 1964, United Press International estimated that hundreds of John F. Kennedy memorial tributes had been established around the world. When that news story was revisited just 1 year later, Kennedy memorials around the globe numbered well into the thousands. Within a week of the assassination, Cape Canaveral in Florida became Cape Kennedy. New York's Idlewild Airport became John F. Kennedy International. Within 2 months, Congress voted to name the upcoming National Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. In Massachusetts, the president's home state, there were so many memorial proposals that a special commission was created to choose among them. Around the world, in addition to newly created statues and memorials, a number of schools, bridges, civic centers, golf courses, theaters, streets and avenues, even a forest and a mountain were renamed in memory of President Kennedy. But what about Dallas? Burdened by international criticism and branded a toxic environment dominated by political extremism, Dallas was recognized around the world as the place where Kennedy was shot. With Dealey Plaza rapidly emerging as the city's most visited site, and with this building, the Texas School Book Depository, one of the world's most photographed structures, the president's murder was a painful memory for local residents, and few were eager to perpetuate that tragedy with some permanent installation. That UPI story from 1965 mentioned that Dallas was planning an official memorial to President Kennedy, though it would take another 5 years for the John F. Kennedy Memorial to be completed and dedicated in 1970. So what happened between those shots fired in Dealey Plaza and the dedication of this Dallas tribute to the late president? The local memorialization of President Kennedy provides a unique window into the mindset of a community struggling to overcome the darkest moment in its modern history. The result was a series of heartfelt, often unusual, frequently controversial, sometimes downright whimsical tributes, very few of which can still be seen today. So let's briefly explore this untold story of how Dallas remembered President Kennedy. We begin with an eccentric Dallas resident, Dr. Cosette Faust Newton. Born in Kemp, Texas, back in 1889, she earned 2 doctoral degrees and was at one time the only female PhD on the faculty of Southern Methodist University. But by the 1940s, her colorful antics had frustrated or bewildered many in the local community. For example, she was once arrested for kidnapping her chauffeur and holding him hostage inside her attic for 5 days. Later, she fought the township of Highland Park over a gigantic $60,000 model ship that she built in her backyard and launched with great fanfare 5 days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. At the time of the Kennedy assassination, the flamboyant Cosette Faust Newton was preparing to open a building that she called her Miramar Museums on Cedar Springs Road that was filled with trinkets from her world travels. She delayed its opening 2 weeks because of the president's death. This is from our collection, the Newton's 1963 Christmas card, which includes a poem that she wrote in memory of President Kennedy. And the poem seems fixated on the idea that President Kennedy passed by her soon-to-open museum and saw its neon sign in the final moments of his life. The poem read in part, "Alive and well, he motored by. 10 minutes later, he had to die. Alive and well, he passed this door. A little later, he was no more. Alive and well, he absorbed our sign. So now our building's a hero's shrine." She dedicated her facility to the late president with a marquee outside declaring it a hero's shrine dedicated to the martyrized John F. Kennedy. Although there was actually very little in the Miramar museums that featured President Kennedy, in 1964, Mrs. Newton did continuously screen an 18-minute compilation of home movies of the president's motorcade entitled President Kennedy's Final Hour. Interestingly, you could have taken home a souvenir 8mm copy of this film for $24.95, which, adjusted for inflation, is a little over $250 today. A window display further dedicated the museum and its doll collection to Jacqueline Kennedy, she the queenly heroine of the hour. After Cosette Faust Newton passed away in 1975, the museum briefly continued until her husband's death in 1977. Although this timely rebranding of the Miramar Museum may have been the first local memorial to President Kennedy, the first one to genuinely emerge at a site associated with the assassination came in October 1964 at the Dallas Trademark. The Eagle, an 8-foot-tall, 4-foot-wide bronze sculpture, was not an original design, but a replica of the lectern at the Cathedral Church of St. Michael in Coventry, England. The creator, Elizabeth Frink, was commissioned to design a unique pedestal for the Dallas installation that includes a quote from William Blake: "When thou seest an eagle, thou seest a portion of genius. Lift up thy head." It was dedicated by the friends of John F. Kennedy who had awaited his arrival at the Trademark luncheon on November 22nd. The eagle was one of 11 contemporary pieces found in the International Sculpture Garden at the Trademark. Bishop Cuthbert Bardsley, who traveled from Coventry for the dedication, said in his remarks, "You have had many great presidents of your country, but I can think of very few, if any, in the past century who have made his impact so deeply and certainly in so short a time as the late lamented President John F. Kennedy." In his dedication prayer, he said, "As the eagle soars into the air, so may we believe that the soul of John F. Kennedy soars into life and into eternity." The eagle can still be seen at the Dallas Trademark today, just outside the main entrance. A home at 3802 Oak Lawn became a unique memorial to President Kennedy in May 1965. The John F. Kennedy Living Center for Exceptional Youth was a boarding home for children and young adults with intellectual disabilities. The founder was Dixie Shelley Jones, an independently wealthy registered nurse who also administered a Dallas Children's Hospital and a summer camp in New Mexico. Unusual for Dallas memorials, the Living Center boasted direct involvement from the Kennedy family. The late president's sister, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, founder of the Special Olympics, endorsed the project and toured the site a month before opening. The dedication was held on what would have been Kennedy's 48th birthday, May 29th, 1965. Congressman Earl Cabell was present alongside Sarah T. Hughes, the federal judge that had sworn in Lyndon Johnson following the assassination. A telegram from President Johnson was read, congratulating those who had sponsored this worthy cause to which President Kennedy was dedicated. Also in attendance was Marie Tippett, widow of slain Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit, and the Reverend Oscar Huber, who had administered the last rites to President Kennedy at Parkland Memorial Hospital. Great emphasis was placed on the bust of President Kennedy that was unveiled that day. The sculptor, 63-year-old Anthony Paness of Paris, Texas, had toiled for 15 months on the bronze effigy and wept as the bust was unveiled while an Air Force band played God Bless America. He considered it one of his finest works, though at the time, he was best known as the man who had sculpted Abraham Lincoln's left eyebrow on Mount Rushmore. Strange but true. Not everyone was impressed by this heartfelt memorial tribute. Dallas Morning News reporter Kent Biffle criticized this odd depiction of the late president as that of a puffy-faced man with a curiously amused expression. Paness explained in his remarks that the president's unique expression came to him in a dream. The center's residents were dubbed Kennedy Kids and were occasionally visited by special guests, including Vice President Hubert Humphrey's wife, Second Lady Muriel Humphrey, Texas Senator Ralph Yarborough, dressed as Santa Claus at Christmas 1966 to hand out gifts to the Kennedy Kids. The center held well-attended November 22nd memorial services officiated by the Reverend Oscar Huber for several years, but sadly, this memorial was short-lived. In 1972, a 2-alarm fire swept through the center while 12 patients ages 9 to 20 and their caregivers scrambled to safety. No one was injured and no cause was determined, though the center had been abuzz with activity that day as the boys prepared for their upcoming summer trip to New Mexico. Completely destroyed, with damages estimated at over $50,000 or about $400,000 adjusted for inflation, the John F. Kennedy Living Center was not rebuilt. Another memorial, though one of a considerably different tone, was also unveiled in the mid-1960s. The Southwestern Historical Wax Museum opened with the State Fair of Texas and soon became a year-round exhibit at Fair Park in Dallas. Beginning less than a year after the assassination, the museum unveiled a series of vignettes meant to memorialize the late president's visit to Dallas. Here we see the arrival at Dallas Love Field with President and Mrs. Kennedy, along with Governor and Mrs. Connolly. Adjacent to that display was the swearing in of Lyndon Johnson. Less than 1 year after the assassination, the real Sarah T. Hughes stood alongside her wax likeness to dedicate this diorama in September 1964. The presence of Judge Hughes, who had also been at the dedication of the John F. Kennedy Living Center, lent these wax dioramas a respectability that elevated this display from a roadside attraction to a local memorial to the late president, visited by thousands, particularly during the annual State Fair of Texas. But it was the third diorama that brought the memorial some controversy. It depicted alleged assassin Lee Harvey Oswald posed with rifle among schoolbook boxes. The Associated Press called the Oswald tableau eerie and discomforting. And the museum did receive several complaints, with some visitors particularly upset that it was situated so close to the president's arrival at Love Field. One admirer of this particular figure was Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, Marguerite, who visited her son's wax likeness on more than one occasion, usually after alerting the news media about her upcoming visit. Photographing her son's figure in 1965, she told museum officials that while Oswald's hairline was incorrect, sculptors had captured his mouth perfectly. To complete the Kennedy section of this museum, an empty rocking chair was illuminated by a single spotlight. These figures were a featured part of the museum for more than 20 years, even after the Southwest Historical Wax Museum relocated to Grand Prairie, Texas in 1972. But just like the John F. Kennedy Living Center, it was destroyed by fire. A 4-alarm blaze in 1988 that started in the building's electrical wiring melted some 200 figures, including all of those featured in the Kennedy Memorial. The first memorial at the site of the assassination began to take shape in the summer of 1965. It was an effort launched by a single individual, Richardson, Texas resident Martina Langley, who visited Dealey Plaza more than 100 times in a year to pay her respects and speak to visitors from around the world. She joined a dozen other individuals in organizing a committee for a Dealey Plaza memorial to President Kennedy. Langley and her associates passed out leaflets making an argument that was considered startling at the time, comparing this site to Ford's Theater, where Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated 100 years earlier. The committee's vocal efforts led the Dallas Park Board to propose a multi-paneled bronze marker mounted on marble supports near the statue of community leader George Bannerman Dealey, where a similar bronze display was already installed. Interestingly, the original concept only briefly mentioned the Kennedy assassination at the end of 8 detailed paragraphs about the city's early history. Unsatisfied, Martina Langley protested that the historical information was unnecessary. The matter went before the Dallas City Council in 1966, and after some heated discussion, the city relented and decreed that the $8,500 marker would only acknowledge the Kennedy assassination. As installed, the 2 500-pound bronze markers sit side by side, one displaying a map of Dealey Plaza outlining the Kennedy motorcade route and the approximate location of the assassination. The second one describes the shooting in a straightforward manner. Initially, the plaque identified Lee Harvey Oswald as the president's assassin, although that reference to Oswald was deleted during the final text review. On November 22, 1966, the 3rd anniversary of the assassination, Langley led several hundred people in a memorial service in front of the plaques, where her children placed a large floral display bearing the message, "Lest we forget." This marker is still in its original location just outside here. One of the primary reasons that Martina Langley pushed for a Dealey Plaza marker was because she was unhappy that the city's long-delayed memorial tribute to Kennedy was to be located a block away behind the old Red Courthouse, which brings us to the John F. Kennedy Memorial dedicated in June 1970. Plans for the city's official tribute began within days of the assassination. County Judge Lou Sterrett proposed a Dallas memorial to the fallen president, but the idea quickly became mired in controversy, with many, including former Dallas Mayor R.L. Thornton, arguing against any installation that would stand as a reminder of that painful tragedy. Several community leaders encouraged Dallas residents to contribute money to the upcoming John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington instead. Apparently, in agreement, more than 200 citizens sent in letters to the Memorial Commission suggesting a living memorial, such as a scholarship program or a monetary contribution to the arts. Nevertheless, the 24 individuals who made up the John F. Kennedy Citizens Memorial Committee advocated for a permanent memorial installation. Their initial concept, calling for an elegant wall to be constructed in Dealey Plaza, was met with scrutiny. Stanley Marcus, then president of luxury retailer Neiman Marcus, suggested architect Philip Johnson take on the challenge. When consulted on the project, the Kennedy family suggested something very simple for a Dallas memorial, and they approved the selection of Philip Johnson, who was a family friend. The Dallas County Commissioners Court designated the site for the memorial structure in 1964, across from the new courthouse and 1 block east from Dealey Plaza, about 200 yards from the assassination site. But the project became delayed for many years, while a $2.6 million underground parking garage was planned and constructed beneath the memorial site. Construction finally began in December 1969 and was completed 6 months later. The memorial is a roofless room, 30 feet tall, 50 feet square, with a simple black granite slab in the center. Johnson envisioned something very humble and Spartan, a memorial for one whose remains lie elsewhere. Despite the addition of interpretive signage, which explains this concept of a cenotaph or open tomb, the memorial has confused visitors expecting to find a statue or a bust of the late president inside. Nevertheless, as the city's official tribute to the late president, the Kennedy Memorial has served a unique and sometimes unexpected purpose over the decades as a gathering place for assassination memorial services, for concerts, and community activism that links the memory and the unfulfilled promise of John F. Kennedy to modern-day social issues. The memorial was dedicated on June 24, 1970, and 3 days later, the late president's brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, visited the memorial. He called it an effective and impressive memorial, particularly because the architect managed to capture a great many of the qualities of John Kennedy's personality. Interestingly, the journey of Kennedy memorialization in Dallas doesn't end with the John F. Kennedy Memorial, because while this memorial was under construction, work began nearby on a 10,000 square foot privately owned museum on the first floor of the former Daltex building at 501 Elm Street, right across the street here from the Texas School Book Depository. Dallas resident John Sissom, a one-time professional magician who owned a chain of gift shops, was frustrated that there was no museum in the city to honor President Kennedy. So he decided to create his own. As one can imagine, a decidedly homemade museum steps from the assassination site generated controversy. In 1971, the Dallas Times-Herald questioned whether the facility was more ghoulish attraction than historical exhibit. However, with several hundred visitors each day throughout the 1970s, it was considered one of Dallas's leading tourist attractions. John Sissom acknowledged that he had received some criticism for his museum, but stressed, "I feel we have done more for the memory of President Kennedy than others in Dallas." The museum consisted of large newspaper reproductions, photographs, a replica rifle, a bust of the late president, and a shrine-like space that featured a Kennedy portrait by a local artist, Dimitri Vale. The museum's major feature was a 22-minute multimedia presentation called The Incredible Hours. Against a painted backdrop, a model of Dealey Plaza and a portion of downtown Dallas set the stage for a dramatic program in which a string of lights followed the motorcade along its route, accompanied by music, narration, and slides. It was actually an intricate system, and Sissom received a U.S. patent for his automated theater in 1974. Here's a close-up of just a small portion of the Sissom model, which is today part of our collection here. You can really see the detail as far as these tiny, small painted figures and the hand-painted buildings. Sissom's museum lasted 11 years before he lost his lease during a building renovation in 1982. By the time the museum closed, work was already progressing on the museum that we're in today. Development of what is now the sixth-floor museum at Dealey Plaza began in the late 1970s, and we opened to the public on President's Day, 1989, a little more than 25 years after the assassination. This slow process of memorialization leading up to the dedication of the John F. Kennedy Memorial and the opening of our museum really exemplifies how difficult it was for the city of Dallas to come to terms with this dark legacy and internalize this terrible moment in time. This arduous journey from assassination to commemoration was marked by dedication, commercialization, arguments, controversy, and often these grassroots efforts fueled by just one or two very passionate individuals. To quote Richard Sellers of the National Park Service, "Do we dare preserve what still hurts?" Ultimately, Dallas found a way to make that happen, to do justice to a tragic event by remembering it properly. And your visit here today is a testament to that. So, when a news story is written on the 100th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination in 2063, recounting all the various memorials and tributes to President Kennedy still found around the world. In the long term, Dallas's efforts will hopefully rank near the top of that list.